Today's lesson is on simple interest, and there's a formula that I got from the textbook that I put up here, and it is I equals, and I stands for the simple interest, which is money paid only on principal. So I equals P, which stands for the principal, or the amount invested, times by R, which is the rate, and that rate is a percent that we must change to a decimal, and then times by time. And the key, and you'll see it on your homework tonight that you'll need to remember, is that the time needs to be in years. So again, this percent, we're going to always want to change this to a decimal, and we want to make sure our time is in years. So let's take a look at the problems that we might end up seeing. Here's some examples of what we could end up seeing of each of the different types. So here's a problem where they're asking for R. So remember, your formula goes this way. It goes I equals, interest equals the principal times the rate times the time. So you're just going to substitute the numbers that they give you and solve for the one that's left over. So here they're giving you I is 20. And this equals the principal, which is 250, multiplied by the rate. Ooh, well, the rate's what we need. So that's our variable here. And the time is 2 years. So all we're going to do is multiply these two numbers. So 25 times by 2. So when I multiply 25 and 2, that gives me 50. Think of 2 quarters as 50 cents. But I got to bring down the zeros, so I end up with 500R equals 20. Well, to solve this equation, we're going to use an opposite operation. We're going to divide by 500. See, it's 500 times by R, so the opposite operation is division. So when I do this division, I'm going to cancel out these two zeros right here and then just reduce the fraction. See, I've got 2/50ths. Now, before I do this, remember, you want your rate. So remember that quick rule? We want a rate that is in a percentage form. So remember, this percentage form, we change it to a decimal when we're given the percent. But if we want to find the percent, remember, a percent is a number over 100. So let's put 100 in the denominator. Let's just multiply this by 2 over 2. And you see, now we've got this. We've got 4 over 100. And that's the percent that we want. It's 4%. We found the answer. So I didn't need to reduce that fraction all the way. I saw that right away. I could do 2 times 50 and get the denominator of 100, which would give me my percent. Well, let's take a look at the next one here. Here we're looking for principal. So let's write down our formula again. I equals PRT. And let's just substitute the numbers in there. Okay, we're given interest again, 450. This time we're looking for the principal. So principal times by the rate. Now remember, I said you got to change this to a decimal. So the decimal form is when we move that decimal over 2 spaces to the left. So it's going to be 0.06. And then we have 4 years. Now it is in years, so we're okay. So remember, it's always going to end up being in years, not months, not days, not hours. Well, when I do this, I do 6 times 4 makes 24, but then I got to move the decimal back 2 spaces because there's 2 spaces here after the decimal. So it goes right there. Got to bring in my P here, so I'll put the P right there, and it equals 450. Well, from this point, we need to do some division again. So when we divide by 2400ths, we're going to move that decimal over 2 spaces. So this is the divisor. It moves over 2 spaces. It means you have to add 2 zeros. So what you need to do is 24 into 45,000. And so when you go ahead and do that division, I've done that already, and I ended up with this. It takes a little bit of time. We end up with a 18 and then a 75. So it's 1,875 when you do that division. Well, on this next one here we're looking for I. And so when we look for I, we've got our formula already set up for that. So it's I equals PRT. So we're just going to go ahead and substitute the numbers in there. We're looking for I this time, so we don't know that, so I'll rewrite that I in there. And it equals the principal. Well, the principal was 1,300 times by the rate, which we need to change this to a decimal. So remember, you're moving that decimal back 2 spaces. And so you got to add a 0 there, so it's going to be 0.045. Uh-oh, we got a problem here. We're not in years. Remember, it's got to be in years. This is months. How much is 6 months? Well, that's just 1/2 of a year. It's 1/2 year, but I'm in decimals here, so let's just change this 1/2 to a decimal. What's 1/2 as a decimal? Well, it's just 5/10. So 5/10 years is the same exact thing. So that's what I'm going to use, 0.5. Well, let's go ahead and multiply some numbers now. So we've got this 45 times by 5. Well, 45 times by 5. 5 times 5 is 25. Carry a 2. 5 times 4 is 20 plus 2 makes 22. But we got to move that decimal back 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces. So that means I have to add an extra 0 there and then put the decimal. We still need to multiply this by 1,300. So quite the multiplication problem. 2-digit by a 3-digit number, basically. Remember, you're moving that decimal back 4 spaces, but you get to add 2 zeros. So there we have it. So we'll go ahead and multiply those two numbers together, and this is what I came up with, $29.25. That's the interest that you'd earn after that 6-month period. Not too bad. Wouldn't mind earning that. After 6 months, not having to do any work, you just put the money in the bank, and the bank earns the money for you. Well, let's take a look at the next one here. Here we've got a word problem. You've got a few of those yourself. So it says you deposit $5,000 into an account. Okay, you deposit. What is this going to represent? Well, go back into this chart up here. I told you what it is. It's simple interest is the money paid on principal. So it's not interest, because you deposited that $5,000. Principal is the amount of money borrowed or invested. That's what we just did. We invested it because we deposited it into an account. So that's what that means. Deposit means principal. So this is our principal here. And it earns 5% simple interest. Oh, well, that kind of gives it away. Whenever you see the percent sign, you know you're dealing with interest. So that's our I. Let's see what else. Well, how long? How long? Well, that means they're asking about time. We don't know the time. That's the question. How long will it be in there before the total amount? Oh, okay. Before the total amount is $6,000. So this represents the total amount of money. So this is the total is the interest plus the principal. Oops, I put an equal sign there. Let's change that real quick. Interest plus the principal. And so when we deal with the total, we've got to do a little bit of work here first. Interest plus principal. So let's go ahead and do this. Let's find out what the interest is. We know what the principal was $5,000. The interest is the total was $6,000. So let's do this. Let's do interest equals, and then we're just going to subtract the amount of principal from the total. And so what that gives me is I equals 1,000. All right, so that's the number we're going to use. Now we're going to go ahead and solve for t. So we had to do a little side work here on the side, and now we've got 1,000 equals, and then I go ahead and substitute my numbers in there. 5,000 in for p, and then times by the rate, which is 0.05, and then times by my time. Well, I don't know what that is, so we'll just use t. And so we go ahead and do some work here. Now, remember, 5 times by 5 makes 25. So I've got 25. Now, let's bring in the zeros here. So 1, 2, 3, but I got to move the decimal back 2 spaces. So it makes 250 equals 1,000. And then we've got the t as well. So we go ahead and do some more work there. We've got to divide by 250. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'll show that division here. Divide by 250. Gotta squeeze that in here. Divide by 250. So now we've got our problem. It's 1,000 divided by 250. And so when I go ahead and do this, I see these zeros cancel out. And now I got to think of how many quarters. When I think of 25, dividing by 25, I think of a quarter. How many quarters make $1? Think of 100 pennies here as $1. Well, that's just 4. So there it is. 4 years. That's the amount of time it's going to take me to have $6,000 total. So remember, if they say total, that's not the interest. That's not the principal. That's the interest plus the principal. So 4 years there. Well, the next one, a deposit of $4,500 earns $3,900 over a period of 8 years. So deposit, we know that's P, earns this amount. So it earns that, so that's our interest. This is our time, obviously. And what is the simple interest rate? That's what we are looking for. That's the unknown. So let's go ahead and substitute in our numbers. 3,900 equals the principal, 7,500, times by time. Let's go ahead and put in that 8 right here, and then we'll put the rate at the end. And so let's go ahead and multiply out some of these numbers here and see what we come up with. So when we do that, 8 times by that 7,500, and what I end up getting here is 60,000. And 60,000 R equals 3,900. So all you have to do there is divide by that 60,000. Now, if you want to make the problem a little bit easier on yourself, you can divide by it. You can reduce it by dividing by 100. So you can cross out these 2 zeros and these 2 zeros. So it's really just 39 over 600. And when you do that, you're going to end up with this. R equals 0.065 when you do that division. Well, that's not quite the answer. Remember, now we want to change this to a percent. So move that decimal back 2 spaces to the right. So 6.5% would be our answer there. Well, taking a look at the next one here, we have after 6 years, well, obviously that's time, an account that earns 4% simple interest. Well, let's see here, 4% simple interest has earned $480 in interest. All right, so we know that's interest. So let's go ahead and write that in there. I equals PRT. Remember, that's our formula. So interest is 480 equals the principal. Oh, well, how much was the initial deposit? We don't know that. That's our unknown. So principal times by the rate, which is 0.04, and then times by time, which is 6 years. And so we go ahead and do some work there, and we'll multiply that 4 by 6, and that gives me 24. But I got to move that decimal back 2 spaces, so I got 0.24p equals 480. Well, when I do that division of 0.24, I'm going to move that decimal point 2 spaces to the right, 1, 2, add 2 zeros here, and then do 24 into 48. Oh, I know that. 24 goes into 48 2 times. But I got those extra zeros there I've got to bring up, and that makes 2,000. So this means our initial deposit, well, was $2,000. Last one here, deposit. You deposit $4,500. Well, that's got to be our principal. So interest equals principal, rate, and time. We know P represents $4,500 in an account that earns 6% simple interest. Well, that's our rate. Well, let's change it to a decimal, 0.06, and it says how much will be in your account. In your account, well, they're talking about a total amount. Remember, the total is the interest plus the principal. So we got to find the interest first after 5 years. So let's put that in there. So there's 2 parts to this problem. So we got to find the interest first. We go ahead and do this math here. 6 and 5 multiply to make 30. Bring the decimal back 2 spaces. Makes 0.30 or 0.3. 3/10 is another way to think of that. And we go ahead and multiply the 3/10 by that 4,500, and let's see what that gives us. It gives us interest equals, well, that's going to be a $1,350. Well, we're not done yet, though. If you write that down as your answer, you're getting it wrong, because what you need to do now is you need to add the principal, which was the initial investment, plus the amount that you made, and add those together, and now you'll get your answer. So we get 5, 8, 5, and 0. There it is. $5,850 is the total amount after 5 years. Good luck on tonight's homework.